The Dark World from Zelda uses a lot of interesting chord progressions and harmonic devices. And it sounds really intuitive, but that's because it's wonderful writing. It's actually a very complicated piece of music, and today we're going to go through every single harmonic device featured in the piece. So, starting out, we have the famous Dorian vamp, which is this tonic, predominant, rather ambiguous, adventurous sounding vamp, and it contains the Dorian mode. And that's how it functions. It uses the Dorian mode, but even more than that, it uses this framework of extending the Dorian mode, and it works within this sort of real sequence which is going to become important to understand later in the piece, right? So at this point, we just have the beginning of this progression, which is the part that's in C Dorian. So moving on, we have the A section. There's a lot to talk about in the A section. We have a tonic function chord, moving to two predominants, and then our dominant to the tonic. Rather simple, and we get this Nintendo epic adventure progression. You know, epic doesn't mean anything anymore, but it used to mean swords and monsters and fighting evil, you know? So this progression is something that Nintendo uses a lot. So it became kind of like a Nintendo staple, I think, after A Link to the Past. It's this adventurous Koji Kondo chord progression that shows up everywhere in Nintendo games. Now, another cool thing about this A section is how it ends. We get this emphasis of the chordal ninth. And what that does, the first time around, creates a little bit of a lead into the melody. Extending the chord in Dorian is an extremely common device, and as we saw, the vamp at the beginning of the piece is also extending Dorian. And we're going to see even more extensions of Dorian later in the piece. Another chord progression featured in the A section is this flat 6, flat 7, 1. Flat 6, flat 7, 1. Which is pretty typical for Koji Kondo's music. And then we get the B section. And the B section is similar to the A section in some ways, right? You can see functionally we get green, blue, blue, red. And I mean, take a look at this section. The first line of the A section has that C minor chord, but then we have F, A flat, B flat. And if we look at the first line of the B section, we have F, A flat, B flat. Well, that's kind of cool. And then we have this E flat chord, right, which seems to be substituting for the C chord. And if you notice, they're both green as well. They're both tonic function. That means that they're both stable chords. But even though they're both stable, listen to how different these two sections sound. Versus this. Nothing alike at all. The character is completely different. And that's because we changed tonics. If we change tonics, then it feels like we're in a different tonal setting, right? And we'll talk about that more later. Keep that thought in mind. The rest of the B section has changed. And we'll talk about what is going on here. For continuity, here's the A section and the B section. So if you notice, we moved keys. This, we eventually got to G minor somehow. So there is this 7 fully diminished 7 chord, and in this case it's functioning as a 7 of 5, and if you notice it goes to 5, so that's pretty typical. And then we end up all the way in G minor, and then that G minor right, that G minor tonality then moves to flat 6. G minor is what in the key of C minor? That would be the minor 5 chord. See, I circled minor 5. So, but actually the last chord is not minor 5, it's a 4-6-4. That's kind of a weird transition from C over G to the A flat chord at the beginning of the C section. Very unusual. Another thing is we get the Dorian extension, but G Dorian. And that's how we transition to the interesting thing about this is that it's just the top of the G Dorian part of the Dorian extension, right? Here's the Dorian extension. And it's just the top part, so without the pedal. And so it's just a G minor chord moving to a C over G, moving to a B flat over F, over G actually, moving to a C over G. And the Roman numerals would actually be the same as at the beginning of the piece. So they'd just be in G minor. So it'd be 1, 4, 6, 4, 1, 7, and 4, 6, 4 again. Now, moving on from that, we have the C section, which is the most complicated place in the piece harmonically. It starts out rather functionally, right? We get from that weird C major in second inversion moving to A flat transition. But that gives us our flat 6 chord in the key of C minor, right? And then we move to G minor. initial progression, flat 6 to 5, is rather simple, and it's a major 7 chord moving down a half step to a minor 7 chord. I mean, he does actually voice it upwards. But then he goes to this really weird chord. How would you even analyze that? Well, I think it's two things. I think it is a major 7 chord that is moving down a half step to a minor 7 chord. So we have but we also have all the notes of a fully diminished chord as well. So you get the and that would be a 7 of 5, and it would be a 7 of 5 moving to 4. So it would be kind of like a chromatic passing 7 of 5. So you have like... To give an example of another type of chromatic passing 7 of 5, it's a jazz thing. You've probably heard this before. Or if we're going to use the one that starts on 5, it would be like... Or... Right? All of these are rather jazzy sounding. It's just like a transition, a way to get from this dominant chord to a predominant chord in a way that sounds really smooth. The nice thing about it is it avoids a regression, or rather it disguises a regression. So you're going from a dominant function chord to a predominant chord, which happens in jazz. In classical music, they try to avoid it. They see it as bad practice. But in jazz music, they don't care at all. They'll just do regressions all day. That's a difference in philosophy between the two styles. Another way to look at it is to use these major and minor 7 chord rules. Because we kind of have both chords in here, we have the G flat major 7 and we have the 7 of 5 in here, we can kind of analyze it both ways. So if we have, that's a major 7 chord moving down a half step to a minor 7 chord. And that would be continuous. You see, that's the magenta colored thing on the diagram. And then we have a minor 7 chord moving down a half step to a major 7 chord. Right? And that would be also continuous. And then we get the same thing before, right? So we have a major 7 chord moving to a minor 7 chord, moving to a major 7 chord, moving to a minor 7 chord. So we have this pattern going on. And then we have this really unusual chord. Then we start to get this odd flat 4 chord. What's so unusual about it is it's a dominant 7th chord built on scale degree 3 that's resolving to a 1/6, to a first inversion 1 chord, which is really unusual. And I've never actually seen another example of this. This is sort of a Koji Kondo thing, so I'm calling it the Kondo flat 4, right? There's 2 other flat 4 chords that I know of. I named them based on how they're done in the Prelude in C minor, right? So Chopin wrote a piece called the Prelude in C minor. The B section goes like this. So that's what I call the Chopin flat 4 chord. If it was the one that Barry Manilow used in the pop song version of this Prelude in C minor, he changed it to this. But Kondo's is even weirder than that. This is how Kondo's sounds. Really colorful, very colorful sound. I'm going to do all the other ones using the Manilow, the Chopin, and the Kondo version. So we have... Here's the Chopin. That one's really dark sounding in this context. I wouldn't really advise doing that. I'm happy that Kondo didn't do that. It just doesn't really fit the adventurous vibe. It's too dark. If we were going to use the Manilow one, I think it would sound fine. Originally, that's what I thought it was. But this is what Kondo actually did. Isn't that weird? There's kind of this inner voice going on. Yeah, very unusual. And then we get this 5/7 of 5, which is just a normal tonicization. Which then we go, which is our 5 chord. And that's the most common tonicization. So that one isn't that weird. What is weird is the 5/7 of 5 is a really bright chord. Look it. It's in the major parallel secondary box, while flat 5, which is this chord, is borrowed all the way in the minor tertiary chords. To give perspective of how far away that is, this is, if we were on the 1 chord, we would have to go all the way around the circle to get to that flat 5 chord. And to get to that 2 chord, we'd need to go all the way here. So that's really far away from each other. Another way to put it into perspective is from flat 5, you need to go to the minor parallel secondary chords, and then to the minor secondary chords, and then to the major primary chords, and then to the minor primary chords, and then to the major secondary chords, and finally to the major parallel secondary chords. As you can see, we moved through a lot of different centers in order to reach that major 2 chord. There's even more ways to think about it though. 5 of 5 has a sharp 4 in it, which makes it sound like it's borrowed from Lydian mode, which is the brightest mode, and flat 5 has a flat 5 in it, which means that it's borrowed from Locrian mode, which is the darkest mode. So that's a really massive difference in modal brightness. Another cool thing is that reminds me of the Zelda theme, because back when we analyzed the Zelda theme, we also had a 5 of 5 chord, that natural 2 chord, and a flat 2 chord. This is the A section. There's our flat 2 chord going to 1, and then to the natural 2 chord. There's our 5 of 5 going to 5. And if we remember that flat 2 chord is borrowed from Phrygian all the way down there, and the Lydian 5 of 5 is there as well, it's not the same modal contrast, but it is a modal contrast that's rather distinct, which is a large distance modally as well. And I think that there's some intentionality to this. I think that this is a way that Koji Kondo is bringing continuity, because the Zelda theme is like a parallel to the Dark World music. So I think he's trying to find ways to tie in this theme to the Light World theme, which is the Overworld theme. In my video on the Zelda theme, I talked about this passage. And I call it sweet, remember? Right? So why does that sound sweet? It's because we have every single one of the minor secondary chords. Because of how relative keys work, if you have every single one of the minor secondary chords, it usually causes the phrase to sound rather sweet. Similarly, if we look at the Dark World theme, we have this E flat chord in the B section, which is flat 3. We have A flat in the B section, which is flat 6. And we have this B flat chord in the B section, which is flat 7, and that completes the minor secondary chords. So just like in the Zelda theme, we have a sort of sweeter thing going on here in the B section. And that's why I mentioned before that it sounded sweet in the B section, because when you have this E flat chord, which is borrowed from the minor secondary chords, alongside the other minor secondary chords, it starts to make you hear things in the relative major, which sounds sweeter. Right? Compare that to the rather bombastic A section. It gets bombastic again at the end with that Dorian sound added back in. I think this reveals a very important thing about Kondo's music. He tends to add continuity to his soundtracks through referencing the underlying progressions of tracks to compare them to each other. I'll show more examples of this later, in future videos. But for now, I think that's good for the Dark World. We went through a lot of different things. So that should be it for today. Our channel footage today comes from the channel Zor Zelda. I could have just played A Link to the Past. I want to play A Link to the Past. It's one of the only Zelda games that I've never actually beaten. I got pretty close to the end of the game and then I dropped it. And it's not something that I'm super proud of. So maybe I'll go back and actually play it someday. I did beat A Link Between Worlds, which I liked a lot. And I've played every 3D Zelda, but I have yet to play A Link to the Past all the way through. I've even played Link's Awakening and a lot of the other 2D games. I like Oracle of Seasons. Oracle of Ages is not my favorite game in this series. But yeah, that should be it for now. See you in 2 weeks and donate to my Ko-Fi. I'd really appreciate it.